Welcome to Discovering You, a podcast that explores the intricacies of personality and how it impacts the way we navigate through life. What will you discover today? Hi, listeners. Hi, Heather.
Hi there.
Look at us. We're both early. I think it's a high D thing.
I would have thought that was a high C thing.
I hear you on that. For sure it is, because high Cs are like, this is the time we should be here. But I think it's a point of pain for high Ds. I just made a joke about this at a session I was doing yesterday. And like, high Ds have this particular quirk where if you are late to something, it's almost like they take it personally. They feel like you don't respect my time.
Well, I 100% do that. That's why I'm always so early. Because if someone's late, I'm like, sorry, you said 10, not 10:01.
A lot of the sessions I do are for salespeople, realtors, and there's a lot of high eyes, a lot of chit-chatting, networking that goes on. And I'll usually make a joke because I'm reading the room and I can see. So the high Ds are there and they're kind of looking at me, not subtly, kind of like, okay, like, let's go. What's happening? Sometimes they'll even say it. Oh, I thought this started at 1, like it's 1:03. The high eyes are not paying attention. They're just busy chatting and enjoying everything around them. The high S's are being patient. They're okay. And the high C's are sitting there. They're, I can see them. They're looking at their watch. They might be sighing, but they're not looking at me, kind of like, come on, let's go. So they're there. They're following the rules, but they don't seem to have that same level of let's get to it. And I am surrounded by high Ds. I know that this is particularly a thing for them. And it really does tie into the, you're not respecting my time or you don't think I'm worthy of it. And it's so fascinating to me because I, of course, like to be on time, strive to be on time. But if somebody's late, especially just a few minutes, it doesn't bother me at all. I'm just like, okay, life happened. I'm really quite used to it. And I don't take that personally at all.
Oh, I 100% take it personally.
My D, as we've talked, is sort of hovers around the midline depending. So sometimes it's slightly high, sometimes it's slightly low, but my C is usually consistently fairly high. That doesn't really bother me. If it was really late and nobody sent me a message, that would bother me.
I almost to the point where like 9:59 is late for a 10 o'clock.
Oh my God, here I am congratulating myself for getting on at 9:58.
Like I am next level. Early to you is 2 minutes to 10 and early to me is like 20 to 10.
Oh my God, that is so hilarious. Okay, so now I have to ask you this then. Personally, let's say you're having somebody over to your house. So people are coming over.
We don't do that.
Okay. So we're going to stop in our tracks right now on that.
We don't have people over.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to ask you to maybe imagine that, okay? And imagine that, you're doing stuff. Either you're cooking or you're making sure the house is clean or you're just...
Victoria, it's like you don't even know me.
Okay, I'm trying to do a hypothetical.
Okay,
Heather.
sorry, yeah. Sorry.
For our listeners and like for me, let's say, okay?
Okay, yep.
The point is somebody is coming into your personal space, right? And then you are trying to welcome them in and whatever. So for me, if somebody shows up early, if I say, come over at 7 o'clock and you ring the doorbell at 5 to 7, I'm annoyed.
I think people are like me. Like I'm ready at 1:45, so they can come if they want.
This is fascinating.
I just like to be planned so that I can take a breath and then walk in.
I completely agree on that. But here's the thing. Same thing. I want to be early. But then when I get to where I'm going, if the time is 7 o'clock, I'm sitting in my car for 15 minutes. I'm not going to intrude upon...
I don't think I would go in early.
Yeah, it's so funny. I would so much rather somebody be 5 minutes late than 5 minutes early.
I think part of it for me is maybe also that I just pack too many things into a day.
Mm-hmm.
We're fortunate enough to have lunch last week.
Yes.
And I had to be somewhere after and I had to be somewhere before. I wanted to fit the right amount of time in. Didn't want to be late for you. Didn't want like that part sort of it causes anxiety for me.
Right.
Like I literally to the minute it ends at 1, I'll be there at 1. And I was pulling in at 1 and I was like, I don't like that. That's late.
And of course it was still going on.
But I feel like I did my part it running over and that part of it doesn't bother me. Like if a whole event is running late. But if I have a meeting with someone and they've booked a call with me and it's between 10 and 11, then come at 10.
I'm sure there's a lot more to it than just disc, but I think the difference maybe in the S, because S is super high for me and needing the time to process and prepare and all of that kind of stuff, right? So we're both high on the introversion scale, right? HSP for me and everything. So like before people are coming, I kind of need a little bit of time. I want to get things, well, okay, and I'm going to bring it into Enneagram now, Enneagram type 1, perfectionist. So if I'm having people over, I'm like, okay, this has to be clean. The food has to be set out. I want to like light this candle. And that's kind of my thing. And I think I'm doing that as a way to just like prepare myself and center my energy. So then if somebody shows up before I've had the chance to do that, it throws me off. And I think that's the thing. And I almost feel like I can't recover. I feel like I'm scrambling. And then I feel like, oh, this hasn't got off to the right foot already.
Well, mine is the perfectionist thing is that's why I'm on time.
Right.
So I'm perfect if I'm on time. I'm even more perfect if I'm early.
It ties into the theme of this podcast and everything that I'm talking about in terms of we see things through our own lens. And then, you know, if we don't put extra work or thought into it, we go through life thinking, what's their problem? Why are they doing that? They're this, they're that. But then if we take a step into their shoes, so for instance, you and I would have a lot of similar values in terms of how we approach work and life. But look right there, that's a completely different thing that if I hadn't just randomly said, oh, we're early, and you're like, what?
The part that I find interesting about it is, and it takes it back to why I was fascinated with you and this all in the very beginning, the fact that you recognize that other people see things or do things or think things differently than I do, right?
Yeah, listen, I think it's great if everyone could do that a bit. And again, I'll be the first to admit you can over-index in it. I spend sometimes too much time trying to find reasons for people, excuses for people. And that's probably why my disc report comes out to say you shouldn't be managing too many people because you will probably get consumed in that and their needs and why that would happen. And are you making effective business decisions because of that? Probably not.
Well, and it comes back to me too, where I'm like, I probably overfill my days because I like being busy and I like working that way. But then it doesn't allow for other people to show up late because I've tried to fit too much in. And so the self-awareness is there that I do that. I haven't actually gotten to the point where like I've made adjustments for that or space for that.
Right.
Left to my own devices, it would be fine. I could fit all of those things in the day. I need to now adjust because I've added people into my schedule. I'm never proactive enough to get organized for the busy seasons.
Well, it's okay. That's a lesson. You're probably moving in that direction.
Well, and it'll bring us when we talk about how we feel, because then it all came full circle. Did you do yours today?
I'm hovering between the yellow and the green. The listeners, if you do the How We Feel app, you'll see in the 4 quadrants. It's weird because I would think my energy is more green because I'm kind of tired. So yesterday was a long day for me. We drove not quite, but almost 3 hours. I was doing an out-of-town session, so drove almost 3 hours there. Then had a 3-hour session where I'm on, taking a lot of energy, and then chatting with people afterwards, whatever, and then a 3-hour drive home, all in the same day.
Yeah, that is a big day.
I'm tired, right? But I also feel, I guess, pleasant. I feel like relief that it's done and it went well. I was thinking it would be green. So for green, it popped up fulfilled, the area that the energy I thought would be. But then I feel like sometimes the descriptions are just, they're not quite what I think, right? So this is saying you have accomplished important personal goals or become the person you want to be. I'm like, that is really a lot to say. And again, being a perfectionist, am I ever really going to say, yeah, I've become the person I want to be? I don't think so. Even though I feel like my energy is probably green, I am going slightly one above to the yellow, which is accomplished, which is saying feeling effective and successful because
nice.
It went well yesterday. It was a big day. It's done. I feel good about it.
Amazing.
Thank you. How about you?
I am in the yellow.
Oh, we're both in the yellow.
I feel like this week I've kind of been a lot of emotions. And sometimes I get to that I have to go through a lot of emotions, and then I'm like, okay. Again, I say my high D kicks in. Today I have determined. The definition in the app is knowing what you want and not letting anything stand in the way. The last 24 hours, I've really got ramped up. So this morning I woke up and I was like, today's the day.
Wow. Okay.
I do. I feel determined.
Nice. Last time we did it was so funny because we had the exact same word, which was nuts. And neither of us had ever had it. But today we're also in the same. So I don't know. We're pretty in sync.
Pretty aligned.
Okay, I thought I would do what we did last time in terms of our highlight and our low light since we last met. I can go first. Maybe this is my personality. I'm going to start with the low light because I want to end on a positive note. I guess my low light of this past month has been Winston, my cat. We have had a lot of vet visits. He's had a lot of tests. He's okay, but I did notice that he acts like he's starving. He is constantly begging for food. And I did notice that he had lost a bit of weight. Brought him to the vet. Anyway, long story short, there's been lots of vet visits, which he hates going. He hates going in the car. He's fine when he gets there, actually. So lots of vet visits, lots of tests, which of course, as everyone knows, lots of money. And here we are, and no diagnosis. That has been the low light. We probably still have one more to do, but it's been frustrating. And of course, when he's stressed out, it makes me worry about him and all of that. So that would be my low light. And I would say my highlight has been lots of beautiful weather in September. So I got lots of swims in. Swimming is kind of my happy thing to do, almost meditative. It's my exercise and I love to be able to do it outside. Swam right up until the last day of September. It was a beautiful month. That's my highlight. How about you, Heather?
My highlight, I think, was the same as it was last time, except last time it was pre-vacation and now it's post-vacation. So we were able to go away and it was amazing. The weather was incredible, like you said, and we were on the lake. I tried out my paddleboard.
That's awesome.
It was really fun and relaxing. And yeah, I feel very fortunate that we were able to do that because we had canceled every other trip this year.
Good. I want to try paddleboarding.
So it took me a minute for sure. I'm not the most flexible person, physically or mentally.
That's so funny.
But I really enjoyed it. It was kind of cool. My low light is not dissimilar from yours. I came home from vacation and my one horse wasn't doing well. And so she needed a few vet visits and a lot of care. And then she just got better. And then my other horse got an ulcer in her eye. And so she needs a lot of care. It's been a lot. They're both on the mend and they're both going to be fine. It's just super time consuming and unfortunately a little expensive.
If you've been listening to this podcast since the beginning, in the first episode, I briefly mentioned this comparison, and this leads into this month's disc comparison because it's October, and October is International Coffee Month. So of course I had to do disc as coffee. High D is espresso, swift and bold. High I is macchiato, sweet and frothy. High S is latte, smooth and mellow. And high C is Americano, strong and precise. Let me remind you again, listeners, that this is to embody the characteristics of the disc factor. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to like the one that you're paired up with. However, mine works out perfectly. Latte is my drink of choice. I don't know, Heather, I don't know that yours does.
No, mine doesn't line up. Lattes is my drink of choice. So I've never had the other three.
It's so funny when I do these, certain ones resonate with people. Like people love, I think the last one was the social media. People really like that one. And people really like the coffee because I think, if you watch someone drink an espresso, you can see the high D-ness of it,
it's
right?
Over.
What do you want? You want a maximum result in a quick amount of time. So I want caffeine and I want a bold taste of flavor. Boom, down the hatch, you're done. That is helpful to understand it. I did that one yesterday at my session and everybody was very entertained. We were fortunate to have a special guest on this episode. Michelle Minnikin is a chartered organizational psychologist, an executive coach, a speaker, a podcast host, and author of Good Girl Deprogramming. Michelle is a co-founder of Work Pirates, a people development consultancy. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure.
Oh my gosh, for me too. So what happened was your team reached out to me and suggested that we had a similar focus, so therefore likely similar audience. I had heard you describe yourself as somebody who's always interested in humans and motivation and why people do the things they do. And honestly, I don't know how many times I've said exactly that on this podcast. That really resonated with me. And as I began to learn about you, I realized we have so many things in common. We're going to get to that. But before we do, can you start by telling me what led you to develop your company, Work Pirates? And can you tell us the meaning behind your company name?
I did the whole go to university, go get a proper job, work my way up in various companies, all was very masculine orientated companies. So construction, engineering, technology companies, I just thought was very interesting in hindsight. After I completely burnt out in the last company, and I don't know whether I was fired or whether I quit, but either way, I walked out there without a job. And I always wanted to work for myself. Well, ever since I knew what I wanted to do when I grew up, I was like, I want to work for myself. But I was always very young looking and bubbly and enthusiastic and stuff. And people didn't necessarily take me seriously. So I had this weird belief that I had to be grown up. Can you imagine? Had to be grown up before that happened. So I left corporate, set my own psychology practice up, and it was very boring, very typical. And I was doing lots of work, psychometric testing, redesigning selection processes. It was not me. In 2018, I read a book called Be More Pirate, which is awesome. And that gave me the permission just to be me. And I don't have to be like every other psychologist on the planet. I can just be me. So my partner and I, this is literally during the first lockdown during COVID, because, that's the best time to set up a business, isn't it?
Of course.
We were like, I'm bored with this company. We need to rebrand. It's like, we don't need to rebrand. We need to throw the whole thing out and start again with something a bit more us. So I work with my partner, who's also my partner, which is a whole different podcast, I would imagine.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
It is. It is lots of fun, but it's also, we're too nice to each other as well. So having that sort of business partner relationship sometimes can be like a bit blurry.
For sure.
So we thought, what could be better than Work Pirates? Because we go in, we solve people problems, we share the bounty with the people that we work with, and then we sail off into the sunset. And we thought, there's no way on earth Work Pirates wasn't taken. So we went on straight onto the, GoDaddy and the trademark people. And it's like, oh, obviously it was waiting for us. That's where that came from.
Oh, I love it. And so the pirate being the whole, I like what you said, the analogy about the bounty and sailing off to the sunset. So when I've heard you on a couple of other podcasts, so it is very tied into that. But I guess the metaphor of pirate is, I think your approach is probably more unconventional, right? Is that sort of what it's getting at?
You would think so. So in the golden age of pirates, which was the Be More Pirate book was looking at, they were all about equality, sharing power, sharing decision making, and cocktails, because of course they invented cocktails. It's all of the stuff that we should have in every company. So they rebelled against the Navy, the way of doing things, that there was so much exploitation and extraction. So it's all about fairness and sharing power and sharing decision making and empowering people. It's not as radical as you would think, actually.
Right. It isn't that funny, because the concept, it would be kind of like the rebels, and to a degree doing something a little differently is almost rebellious, but I love how it's not black and white. Maybe it's counterculture, but in fact what you're saying, it's sort of for the greater good. It's allowing other people to have an equal say and share in decision making. I don't know that many people would know that about pirates, and certainly I didn't.
No, it's a brilliant book. I love it.
That's amazing. I was also listening to you when you talked about this big sort of, I guess, life change, stepping away from doing something in a big organization, wanting to do something on your own. This also tracks for me. This is something very similar to me. And a lot of what you were talking about, what drove you to this, is you had a later in life or recent discovery and diagnosis. If you wanted to share that, I think that would be great.
So interestingly, really, I went through my education and my work with this kind of feeling that I was awesome at some stuff and absolutely awful at other tasks and activities. And I just couldn't understand why that was. Funnily enough, it was the boring, admin, repetitive, detail type stuff that I really struggled with. But then, implementing a global talent attraction process and system, complete doddle. So It's almost like that, like the simple, boring stuff I couldn't do, but the complicated, interesting, having to deal with lots of people and moving parts, I was great at that. I had all that in the background, and as you do, we internalize it and we just think we're just a bit rubbish. But it wasn't until International Women's Day 2020, just as the pandemic was starting to happen, I was invited to a breakfast conference at the House of Lords in London. And there I met a wonderful lady called Anna Price, who I talk about every time I talk about this. She was telling everybody about her recent ADHD diagnosis. And honestly, it was like massive light bulb time, because everything she said, apart from the really sporty stuff, was me. She was very sporty. I was like, not so much. Quite like swimming. But yeah, it was all me. So I went and got myself in front of a psychiatrist and got my diagnosis just before my 42nd birthday.
I was going to say better late than never. And I think this is happening to a lot of people. I think there's a lot more awareness and discussion and conversation out there about it. You said it was almost everything. Were there a few things that you could highlight that really jumped out at you that maybe you could share? Correct me if I'm wrong, Michelle, but I think it presents very differently in women than in men, correct?
Yes, because when we are raised, you can blatantly tell the boys who have ADHD because they're the kids that can't sit still in class. Whereas we are raised as girls to sit still, be quiet. And so we internalize it, a lot of it. So it's missed completely. So I was diagnosed with both inattentive and hyperactive, which is loads of fun because it's almost having your foot on both the accelerator and the brakes at the same time.
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting analogy.
You can wake up one day and you don't know how the day's going to go because you don't know what your energy is like. But I think the things that really sort of stuck out with what Anna said was this concept of rejection sensitivity. I'm so much better than I used to be because I know it's a thing. But I dealt with my ADHD my entire life through atomic level people pleasing. And if somebody didn't like me, I could tell if somebody didn't like me. And I would make it literally my life's mission to make them like me. It's just how much energy and effort has gone into that. So we talked about that sort of rejection sensitivity and that sort of fear of criticism, and also the rather chaotic sort of love life as well, she mentioned. And like, so I've got a divorce and a half under my belt. So
a divorce and a half.
Yes, I've been separated for years and years. Just haven't got around to the paperwork, which again is my Achilles heel.
Oh,
so, yes.
There we go. Okay. That is really interesting to hear. And I'm going to connect it to this. I know that, again, listeners, some of the things that we have in common, again, working with organizations and using psychometrics and certain assessment tools to help people understand themselves and connect and communicate with others. It's funny because I know that with you and I think it's your partner, James, and he's certified with Gallup Strengths. And so we had a little conversation because I have done that as well in the past. So we were sort of comparing notes. And then the funny thing is I said to you, have you done a DISC and do you remember it? Because that's the main platform that I use. What you just described there in terms of the people pleasing, the rejection sensitivity, I already had you pegged for a really high I followed by a high D, which is so funny because that's exactly what you wrote to me and said you think you are. But that is also very, very much a trademark of high I's, is that wanting to please, that fear of rejection and the sensitivity around it. Also tying back in, you said you have like no C or a very low C. And when you were talking about the admin stuff you'd had to do and even now the joke about paperwork, dealing with that stuff, that is really so on brand. So I always find it fascinating when we see our profiles come to life in one way or another. One of the other things, I had listened to you on a different podcast, and I heard you telling a story about when you were working in a larger company and talking about things that were a trigger for you. And so in this case, you were saying it was like open concept, and you were very troubled by lights and temperature, and you would have migraines. And again, it's one of those things where I'm like, oh my gosh, this light bulb kind of went off with me, but this has happened so many times in the past. I almost liken it to a Venn diagram. So for me, my similarity to you is in the last few years, I've really gotten into understanding HSP. Listeners, I've talked about this on the podcast before. So high sensory processing. There's such a Venn diagram and a crossover between those, right? So when you said that, I was thinking, oh my gosh. And I have done not a formal one, but I've done the assessments, because my daughter actually said to me, Mom, are you sure that maybe you don't have the ADHD with all that stuff? And I was like, yeah, so much of it seems right. But there's a few things that are markedly different. But I also, like you, have, sensitivity to lights and to smells and to sounds. And it's very hard, right?
Yeah. So I was at a conference this week, and it was in one room, overhead lighting, flickering screens, and I had my sunglasses on.
Oh my gosh. See, when you say these things, I'm like, okay, we're the same person, even though we have different disc profiles. But I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sitting there, or a movie, you go to a movie and then you're like, oh, here comes the lights. And I was at a concert, same thing. I'm like, okay, I'm putting on my sunglasses. I can see some people looking, and I'm at the point now in my life where I just let that go. Whatever. I can't control what their impression might be. If they asked me, I'd be happy to tell them. But yeah, you have to kind of do these things, right, to protect it for yourself. And I think I also have fallen prey a little bit in the past to the people pleasing. It's funny, the distinction for me, what my particular trigger, because you were talking about wanting people to like you. And for me, I don't even know that I saw it that way, but I have a particular trigger for people misunderstanding, which is probably why I do what I do in terms of I do a lot of team facilitations and helping people to see each other's perspectives. Part of the reason I have this trigger for being sensitive to people misunderstanding is because I am different. I think somewhere in there, I've always known it. I personally have been misunderstood, right? So if you're somebody like an HSP, more of an introvert, people are like, oh, she's quiet. Maybe she doesn't like me. Maybe she thinks she's better than me, or she's, and all these crazy things that you hear. And like, I've had people say you came across very cold and aloof. And it's so funny because inside I'm the opposite, right? So I have a high degree of empathy too. What I've learned is putting up certain boundaries so that when I'm in a room, I'm not absorbing or taking on people's energy. I don't know if that's something that, you've encountered too, but
I was waving them. I've got crystals around my wrist to soak up other people's energy because I can't deal with it.
oh my gosh, that's amazing. My daughter's always trying to say, Mom, look at this crystal. And then I get so superstitious. And I think if I, I don't want to have to depend on crystals. I could literally see my environment being like loaded with this for this crystal for that. This, and I'm like, I don't know that I can take that on.
Yes, there is that as well. It's like, oh, have I got the right crystals on today? Because I'm going to this meeting. So yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the approach in terms of, I guess, what we both do. And one of the things, again, another similarity that I love is you are using, let's say, assessments as tools. And I heard you say, it's a tool. It's not the whole story. I always say that when I'm coming in to work with people. I say, guess what? I'm not putting you on the couch. You're not lying down for psychoanalysis. This is a really good framework to help you understand yourself and connect with others, but it is not by any means all of it. So I heard you echo that, and I love that. For me, one of the distinctions that I have in the way I run my business, and I think I hear it from you too, is not just willy-nilly sending out assessments and then just making snap judgments. And I think, unfortunately, you can tell me if you've had this experience, Michelle, some of the people that I think have bristled against it, and understandably so, because actually I have witnessed this. I have witnessed them being rolled out incorrectly. If they're rolled out incorrectly, people feel labeled and judged. And I think you and I both have this, the newer sort of positive psychology focus, like, let's look at your strengths. This is what we're here to do. We're here to look at your strengths and bring out the strengths. Because if everybody understands their strengths, first of all, of course, there's challenges inherent in that. But when you know your strengths, you're motivated and you can be in a role where you're going to excel. So I'm curious, tell me, have you bumped up against that in terms of people who've maybe had a poor experience using some of these platforms and felt labeled or judged and versus the approach you take to it?
Absolutely. So many times. I am now called in mostly in terms of my psychometric work to support the assessment and selection of very senior people in organizations. And I have had people who I don't believe in psychometrics. I'm like, well, they are real. They do exist. There's a lot of it's about some fear of what it's going to reveal.
I think it's really important for our listeners and anyone that wants to work with you and to know that that is not the approach, right? That I think the new approach is really what I'm always telling people. It's advantageous to you as the employee, because one of the things that I can pull for their managers is a customized like how to manage report. And really what that is about, tailoring your approach to that person and to make sure that you're building a bridge to connect. So really, instead of feeling, oh, I'm being tested or judged, it's like, well, no, actually now your people manager is going to make an extra effort to try to get to know you. And I think once they know that, it's a whole new ballgame.
It's so much easier to have those onboarding conversations to say, look, this is the type of thing, and it's all about preferences as well. It's not like there's not absolutes in there. People can flex and change a little bit to suit the context. Just saying, this is how this person would prefer to be managed under any circumstances. Do not micromanage them, or this person likes a little bit of hand-holding. So please, as the manager, your job is to get the best out of your people. Please regard this.
It saves headaches on both sides, because exactly that example you used. I had somebody just in the last few weeks say to me, I don't understand. Like, she knows her stuff. She's doing really well. Why does she keep checking with me? I'm just like, yeah, you know it. Just go and run with it. And I'm like, because she has a high C and a high S. So she is looking for that validation, that support. As a high C, her greatest fear is making a mistake. And then I'm like, it's not going to be forever. And then also, here are some things you can say to empower her to know that. But what it was doing, it was causing him to almost think, did I make the wrong decision? Like, does she not know her stuff? And I'm like, no, she does know her stuff. This is what it is. And it's hard for her when you say to her, yeah, just go run with it. You know it. And she's like, no, I need more. I need information.
Yes. Need more input.
It's kind of fascinating, right? When I think I heard you say this too, that people just assume that everybody is the same or something. It's like, no, we are all so different. If we can recognize our individual strengths and the qualities, and this actually brings me to another point. You and I were talking a little bit about the Gallup strengths, which is used in yours, and I had done it. And so we kind of compared notes a little bit. And one of the main ones that you and I have in common is the individualization. That's your number one, and that's my number two. And that ties into what we're talking about exactly, because what the individualization about, one of the things that it says is intrigued by the unique qualities of each person, sees what is special and distinct about each person, a keen observer of people's strengths, and about tailoring your approach to accommodate them and draw out the best in them.
And look what we do
right?
for a job.
Isn't that incredible?
Yes.
Michelle and I had such a great conversation. We had so much to say. So we are going to continue the conversation next time in part 2. Well, that's all for today. Thanks for joining us. Catch you next time. This show is a Twisted Spur media production produced by our very own Heather McPherson. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share with a friend and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Disc coaching. This one-on-one session explores the strengths of your working style and ensures that you're optimizing it. Gain a clear understanding of your motivators as well as your triggers. Learn techniques to connect with your opposite personality style, reducing the potential for misunderstandings and unnecessary conflict. This session includes a DISC assessment, customized reports, and takeaway resources. If you are interested in connecting with Victoria for team building, strategic onboarding, coaching, or speaking engagement, you can contact her at discoverwhatworks@gmail.com.